Hello, this is Matt. Welcome to Unbearable 73. Today I'm going to review this, which is the Sandman universe continuation of Lucifer. So let's give a little history on this. And this is basically my favorite comic series, or one of the three favorites, I should say. Um, so way back in the mid 80s, DC had spun off their Vertigo books, into sort of a creative controlled universe, so to speak. And they wanted the top level guys to do what was called work for hire, which is work that DC would own, so they would have the characters and the rights to them, but that they would have the elite level creators doing it. So to give them that sort of control, they basically, if you write in Vertigo, you will have basically control of these characters from editorial point of view for the rest of their existence. Okay, more or less, yeah, there's legal stuff and money talks and all that, but so basically, Game was like, cool. I want to write about Sandman, the Endless, who he created as the Endless. So he took this character of Dream and revitalized it, enhanced it, made it an absolute concept along with the other Endless: Death, Dream, Delirium, Destiny, Desire, and one I'm forgetting right now. But there were seven Endless. Okay, and he kind of ran with it and created the seven beings who manifest who as the core concepts of existence for what eventually became what was called Yahweh's second creation. I'll get to that in a minute. So along the way, he then got a hold of the character of Lucifer. Now, simultaneously to him getting hold of Lucifer, there was another awesome series called Hellblazer going on about John Constantine, and one of his titular villains was Satan, the first of the fallen. So you had two competing versions of the devil in continuity in the scene, and they had to reconcile them because they were vastly different concepts of characters. Okay, and a lot of this was behind the scenes because the writers were friends and talked and knew the work, and so Gaiman was the one who got control of the concept of the characters. What he would decide to do with it dealt with the problem, which allowed the writer writing Constantine to continue using his character. Okay, so he basically said all the versions of Lucifer, the devil, whatever, that from DC had written before. The character had been around for decades, and whatnot, as well as First of the Fallen, were pretending to be the real Lucifer. Okay, and the real Lucifer, was evil and whatnot, and the real ruler of hell, as appointed by God, which I'll get to in a minute. And all these other characters were basically pretending to be him, and skipping forward a bit to the events of the Lucifer comic, he didn't really care about human souls or anything. So his entire point, the reason he rebelled about, I want to say it's like 5 seconds after creation, off the top of my head, basically, Yahweh, the source, Yahweh is the source, he created a prior creation. We know that because we saw remnants of it, right? And it failed for some reason. So between that creation and what is referred to as Yahweh's second creation, which is the DC universe, multiverse, or whatever, he created Michael and Lucifer, Michael was the manifestation of his power, and Lucifer was the manifestation of his will. So Michael had the infinite power of God, Lucifer had the infinite will of God, and basically Michael could create something from nothing endlessly, but Lucifer could shape anything else endlessly. The only limitation on their powers was that Michael couldn't shape it into anything; it would just form on its own. In terms of the control, he basically didn't have the will of God to shape reality. He had the power of God to create it, and Lucifer had the opposite. He couldn't create something, but he could shape it infinitely, so to speak. And Yahweh intended them to have a particular relationship. I'm not going to spoil the events of the Lucifer series as much as I can, because Sandman, you should read Sandman and you should read Lucifer. Okay, they're just amazing writing. They're two of my three favorites. My favorite comic series of all time is also Superman. It's probably it's literally perfect. I mean, there's no way to say it. It's literally perfect. Okay, and Sandman and Lucifer. Now, Sandman, I'm not going to get sidetracked here because I'm going to get to my review, but I need to set this up. Sandman isn't. It's technically a series, but it's not so much a series as a collection of smaller events. What we think of as Sandman ends for a particular reason, and why there's a Sandman Volume 2, which, so to speak, which is in the Sandman universe. There's a association that goes with this, which I'll cover another thing. Okay. So, well, let's talk about Lucifer. So after Lucifer rebelled, eventually he and Michael started fighting. Now, they were within the second creation, right? So they were fighting with the infinite will of God, infinite power of God, plus all their intelligence and whatever. And Yahweh noticed this and said, wait a minute, if they do this, they're going to destroy all my work. Okay, it ain't going to happen. So he stopped them from fighting, and he said, Lucifer, okay, you want, Lucifer's whole thing is absolute free will. He hates predestination, utterly despises it. Which isn't to say he's not evil in the sense like Lucifer doesn't walk around like the biblical devil and just like, oh, there's a small child, I'll burn him to death. He's not maniacally evil. His evil is that he is caught up in this sort of this trap that he doesn't have absolute free will, so he thinks he is basically enslaved. Okay. Now, since he's kind of infinitely powered, it kind of makes some sense, but not justifying his viewpoint. But anyway, so he says, okay, so I got a deal for you, basically, Lucifer. There's this sort of point in the creation, that you can kind of, and it's important to note, there was, while Michael may have had the infinite power of God, the demiurge, Lucifer had the infinite will of God, there was a whole other subset of God's powers that neither of them had access to. Okay, in other words, they were both trapped within creation. While they were not part of it in the sense that everything else was, they were still limited by being stuck within it. Okay, so he says to Lucifer, "There's a point within creation that's as far free from the plan as it's possible to be, basically." And I kind of made it as a sort of collection point for those who have like mind like you, and I'll give you control over it. And he gives them the key to what became hell. And Lucifer didn't make hell; Yahweh did, and Lucifer became the gateway, the controller of it. And all those who rejected the plan, rejected God's will from a Abrahamic point of view, but point to note that while Yahweh is Yahweh, he's also the Great Spirit. He's also Brahman. He's the top level deity in all the world religions, and he manifests equally real to anyone who worships him in any reality on any planet in DCU as the same sort of being. That's kind of loosely pulled from the concept that most of the top level beings have the same sort of morality in real world religions. Don't murder people and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, don't want to get into that. Okay, so Lucifer goes to hell, and where hell is forming, and it literally forms there. Lucifer's just the first being there. Okay, and he still has all his infinite power. He can do whatever he wants. It's just he chooses to be there and live in isolation. I'll get to what he does in a second. Okay, so eventually, and this explains the other characters. There's some more angels who have a war, and the first of the fallen arrives, and that's Satan. Okay, other beings like Necron and so forth. All these sort of other hell lords appear there. High level fallen angels, really powerful demons. Because it hell's up its own environment. And now Lucifer doesn't care. He's like, just obey the rules I set in this place, which is stay here, basically. Yahweh gave me this control of this place. The only rule is you go unless you're invited out by mortals, you stay here in hell and do whatever you want here. Okay, and otherwise leave me left alone, or I'll erase you. So as much as he's allowed to, He actually does comment to another angel. I would completely erase you from existence if Father's plan didn't preclude that from happening, because he was so annoyed at someone. So yes, he's that powerful. Okay, so 10 billion years pass, and he's basically maligned by everyone because all these other demons and fallen angels across all realities pertaining to be him. It's saying he making deals with souls, committing heinous acts, and for the most part, he ignores it because, again, nothing can touch him. He just had to keep control of the place for Yahweh's deal. Now, what he does intervene in is because he still hates the problem of predestination. So he does intervene occasionally to either when he finds someone interesting or he thinks they'll serve his cause, as it were. Helping them in some way. So when you see Lucifer make a deal with someone, he never takes their soul. Their soul damns itself. he basically said, "I'll give you something, but I have to take something." He has to maintain a certain balance. That's part of the rules he has to operate under. Okay, as per Yahweh. Okay? So, and then 10 billion years pass, and finally Lucifer's had enough. Okay, and I'm going to spoil the events in Sandman somewhat by saying he goes to Morpheus, who's one of the few beings. Like the top level tier is Yahweh. Then right below him is Michael and Lucifer. Okay, and then below them is the Endless, but there's a vast gap in here. Okay, and in right, and you just it stages further down. If you can look up comic fandoms to get the power tier, but the only being close enough in power to help Lucifer get out of his deal is Sandman, Morpheus. So Lucifer basically dumps the infinite will of God into his wings, and has Morpheus cut them off, and then hide them away, so no one could damage them and whatnot, and but they're still a part of him. It's kind of, I don't know if Nick Gaiman was drawing on it, but it's almost how like the One Ring of King Sauron. Not that Lucifer, his concept of Lucifer and Sauron are the same thing, but kind of how they're linked because it comes back up later. So he basically retires. He hands the key of hell off to two other angels that Yahweh sent, that Michael sends. Not Michael. Yahweh sends. Because Michael's disappeared, by the way, and I'm not going to tell you what happened to him. He had his own journey through these comic events, and they're Remael and Duma. I think one is the angel of silence, and the other one is whatever. And he tells one of the angels, because he really can't stand him, because he's always said, if it wasn't precluded by Yahweh's plan, I would just erase you right now. That's how annoyed he gets by him. Then he leaves hell, and he goes, travels around a bit, and because he still, even though he put the infinite will of God into the wings, he still has all his other powers, just by virtue of knowledge. He's a master of all magics. He's a master of all sciences. He's billions of years old and whatnot. He's a master manipulator. He has all the standard angelic powers because he was created as an archangel, then given the will of God, the infinite will of God. So he has all those powers. So nothing wants to mess with him to begin with, and no one really knows other than Morpheus how he powered down. So he goes and settles in. First, he tries to settle a bar, I think somewhere in Australia, and then eventually he goes to the bar in Los Angeles, which is called Lux. And that, by the way, is where the Lucifer TV show kind of loosely was spun off of him. And those of you who only know him from the TV show, I respect the TV show having been good on its own. That was not comic Lucifer, and I bailed out of it. If they had just toned some of the stuff down in that show, toned down the sexual antics, toned down the humor a little bit, because Lucifer's sense of humor is very sort of dark and satirical, whereas in the show it was more snarky, and they just toned those two things, the excessive sexuality. Because Lucifer is, and that's another thing. When Gaiman conceived of him, he made Lucifer androgynous. So Lucifer, if he's going to have sex, manifests what he needs to do so. But he always looks the same. He looks just like David Bowie, who Gaiman loved as an artist, of course. But also, if those of you remember Bowie for most of his life, he was very androgynous looking. So Lucifer looks like David Bowie, and that's on purpose. Okay, so anyway, again, if they had done, I would have watched the rest of the Lucifer TV show after the first 1.5 seasons, and probably enjoyed it if they just toned down some aspects of it. Anyway, but it's still on its own. You're coming from that point of view, I respect that you liked it, and just expect that this concept of Lucifer is a little quite different. Okay, so he settles down in the bar in Lux, and then we get, and that's the last you see of him in Sandman. Now, Mike Carey, who is a great writer on his own, picks up the ball for Gaiman and DC because they want to continue the character, because people love the character, and that's when the Lucifer Volume 1 happens, which my copies are in storage of. I'm lucky because about 8-9 years ago, where I used to live, I moved out of there 3 years ago for other reasons. It was my cousin's house. The basement was very dry, like in a good way. Like for decades, not one drop of moisture. If water even got down there, it just got sucked into the ground. Like you could leave a toilet paper on the ground there for months, and it would never even get damp. You know, and toilet paper is the most most absorbent thing we have as far as paper products. So I stored maybe I'm going to say 75% of my comic collection about I don't know 80-90% of my books down there because I would go down and grab them when I read them and whatever. But my plan was because I was living in a small apartment to eventually move to a larger place, either I own, buy a house or whatever, and have my comics displayed and whatever. Not this place, but anyway. And I don't know where about 7 years ago there was a tremendous flood in the basement. Like one night it was clean dry, and then went down in the morning and it was like 5 feet of water down there. And what we found out later was that maybe one of the 200-year-old wooden water mains in the area had finally busted and changed the water table permanently in our neighborhood to the point where everyone's dry basements were now flood. They didn't quite flood, but they didn't absorb water as well, so there were no good dry basements. But in any case, so I lost I want to say I lost over 2,000 comic books and over 1,000, maybe close to 1,500 regular books. Okay, so but luckily, and I had them all protected. I had them all in high quality plastic and whatever. The only mistake I made was using the comic boxes in there. I probably should have had them in Rubbermaid style containers. The ones that survived were some of the later ones of my books and comics that were in those type of containers. But anyway, and luckily though, Lucifer survived that whole escapade. All but like 2 issues, which died for other reasons. Anyway, to move further on, so we get to Lucifer Series with Mike Carey, and Mike Carey he wrote a book of urban fantasy novels about Felix Castor. I would recommend going to read them even if he's never finished them. They're mostly standalone, so you don't have to worry about the conclusion. Just getting to the point along there is pretty cool. So Mike Carey picks up Lucifer in a bar. Okay, I know this is dragging on long. I'm gonna finish it real quick. Okay, and we have the events of Lucifer, and I'm not gonna spoil. I'm gonna say at the end of Lucifer has a sort of power up, and he leaves everything behind. Okay, now fast forward. There was DC New 52, which did a sort of reboot of Lucifer, which was a joke, another one of the wannabe devils, basically. And then fast forward past that to what they called Lucifer Volume 2, which I heard was pretty good, but then I also heard it sort of it brought Lucifer back as an active character, and I never read. I will read it eventually, but I wasn't happy with what they did with it. But then we get this. Okay, I know 17 minutes in, and we're gonna get to this. Okay. So what is this? So Neil Gaiman came back and he started writing. He all the characters that existed under him, the Sandman characters. I have a link below to the Sandman universe, basically. And this is basically, I guess you would say, Lucifer Volume 3. This picks up in connection to the event of Lucifer Volume 1, which I have not got to. It was about 20 or 25 issues. This is the first 6 of them plus Sandman universe, the sort of mega special in here. I'd recommend getting this. So where does it pick up? Okay, well, Lucifer seems to be trapped someplace. We find out why eventually, and the one thing you learn is that Lucifer, one of his character flaws is that he thinks he's the shit, literally. So he will occasionally make a mistake, because he doesn't pay attention when he thinks he's in on it. And I think this takes place, although Lucifer and Michael are atemporal, I think this takes place before the end of the series, but we'll find out. But I have the next 2 volumes coming up. I heartily recommend it. It's written by Dan Waters. Okay, the cover art is nice. I don't know who the cover art is. Does it mention it here? Let's take a look. We'll look together. Writers, Dan Waters, Neil Gaiman. Art by... They don't list who the cover artist is, unfortunately. They used to do that in a comic. There used to be a more detailed breakdown than this, okay? But this is the quality of the work is up to this. It looks just like previous Vertigo, Sandman, Lucifer's Death to High Cost of Living. Looks like that quality of work. It's very abstract, like you would expect it properly to be. Metaphysical concepts abound, and I'm not going to spoil it because it's freaking awesome so far. Now the rest of the series or volumes could stink, and then but we'll see. Anyway, I highly recommend getting this in the trade. Buy original work. If you want to buy it used on eBay or get the paperback version of it, there'll eventually be a hardcover collective of all of them. I understand if you want to wait for that, that's fine. But buy original work and buy this. It's an awesome product. Thank you. My name is Matt. This is my Rebel 73. That's my review of Lucifer, Volume 3, I guess you would say. But, we'll do a little insight so you can see what's going on inside it. And even Mazikeen, one of my favorite female characters, an awesome character, she's back too. So. And with that, I am out of here.